What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hapness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Jim Kalbach, and we speak about his book, Jobs to be Done, and we take it even further and look at the impact of jobs to be done on facilitation. We speak on human-centered design and go on many tangents, of which one is the future of human-centered design and what would it mean if it was AI-centered design. So stay tuned and listen until the very end, because there are many golden nuggets and merry detours that we are taking. So stay tuned. And by the way, don't forget to scroll down to the show notes to find links to more information and to subscribe to the show if you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for listening. Hello, Jim. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I look forward to our conversation.
Me too. We already had such a beautiful pre-conversation. That could have been a different podcast.
Isn't that always the case, though? You have these great off-camera conversations with folks.
Yeah, the worst happens when you hit record and then both partners get into their podcast voice.
Right.
Try to be so professional.
Right.
I'm lucky this didn't happen with you. And I always start at the beginning. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Yeah. Yes, I do refer to myself as a facilitator, but I don't necessarily identify with that as a profession or a job title. It's like I have a hat that I put on. It's like I can facilitate, right? And I've had a lot of experience facilitating. So it's more, I think it's more like situational for me, right? It's like, oh, we have this big session, or we need a group of people to come together and make progress together. And it's like, okay, I can be the facilitator. So I'll jump in and then I'm the facilitator. But I don't wear a facilitator hat outside of those situations, if that makes sense. So I think it's part of my skill set, and I would identify with being a facilitator, but it doesn't label me in what I do in an overarching way.
Makes total sense. Do you have a label that you would wear in an overarching?
Oh man. I just set myself up for a tough question. I don't know if I know the answer to that, other than problem solver or co-creative partner. Maybe what we were just talking about, co-creation. Yeah, customer-centric advocate, something like that, I think, or human-centered. I would even say human-centered evangelist or human-centered advocate.
Yeah, and what I hear is being more involved in the problem solving instead of just air quotes, just leaving it to the group. Bringing in your own expertise and your knowledge.
I think so, and for me that's part of facilitation, right? Because to some degree, a professional facilitator or trained facilitator, they can facilitate any conversation. It doesn't matter if they know the subject or not. And to some degree, I can do that too. And there's a need for that. That's great. But I tend to not necessarily try to influence the conversation from the inside, but I want to facilitate by getting into a co-creating mode, right? I want to facilitate co-creation, which I think necessarily means I have to have skin in the game, as we say in English, right? A little bit, which might be a different flavor of a facilitator. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah. What comes to my mind is a very particular interest in the outcome. So you
exactly
any outcome. So
that's right.
Agenda, so to speak.
That's right. Absolutely. And for that type of mindset, you need to bring a bit of curiosity, respect, humility as well too. Is like, I might come in with my own point of view because we're going to co-create together and I have some skin in the game, but I'm not going to try to push an agenda or try to steer things. It's not about me, even though I can contribute. It's about getting the result for the group. So in that sense, it's facilitation, I think, as well, too. But I'm not just mechanical, with a timer and saying, okay, let's move on to the next section. Although I do that, too. You push people onto the next section or whatever needs to, that type of logistical facilitation needs to happen as well, too. But I tend to be a little closer to the action.
Interesting. And we could have an entire conversation about that. But I invited.
Yeah. But I still didn't answer your question, which was, when did I start calling myself a facilitator? And I think it was about, 20 years ago, actually, the company that I was working for. This also has to do with my journey mapping experiences too. And when I really started to getting into that field of creating journey maps and workflow diagrams and things like that. And I realized very early on that those types of artifacts, the customer journey map, doesn't tell anybody the answer. There's no magical answer that pops off of it. And unless you want wallpaper, something you just stick on the wall, you got to bring it to life. And you bring it to life by facilitating the conversations. So the journey map is really just a stimulus that you bring into a group of people to have a conversation around. And again, I had this opportunity in the company that I was working for to do a lot of mapping, journey mapping and workflow diagram. And then it was like, oh, we got to bring all these stakeholders together, and I need a half-day long workshop with them to make sense of it. And then I kind of became a facilitator. But my route there, my path there, and I think a lot of your guests would probably say the same thing, was learning by doing. Like, I just had to do it, and I became a facilitator, which I think I'm qualified to call myself now, simply just by doing it. Right? You know, getting up and failing and running to a brick wall, learning from that, and don't make that mistake next time. You know, and you do that for a couple of years, and you're like, yeah, okay, I know how to run the next workshop. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So 20 years ago.
Wonderful. Wow. That's a long time. And somehow the image that came to my mind was that the journey map is a co-facilitator.
I think so.
So these artifacts they are facilitating the conversation.
Yeah, it's a narrative. It's a way of storytelling, right? I love user research, doing interviews and extracting the insights from the interviews. And a journey map is really just a very compact and a very visual way of telling the story of what you found out in the field, right? But its purpose, there's no value in a journey map. You don't sell it to customers or, use it in board meetings or anything like that. It's really an artifact to have a conversation around. And if you don't see a journey map that way, you probably have a lot of wallpaper that's left over, and you're not activating it to the degree that you need to activate it, right? And it's that storytelling, it's the narrative. A journey map brings a narrative into a session that needs to be facilitated.
Yeah, absolutely. I am very curious about jobs to be done.
Okay.
You wrote, and how you got there. What got you to write it? And maybe what do you mean by jobs to be done? Okay. Just to get those who don't know in the boat.
Yeah, sure. It was actually around the same time that I just mentioned, about 20 years ago, when I started getting into things like facilitating conversations around journey maps, that I learned about jobs to be done. And I saw an immediate connection there as well, too. The journey map is about a visual storytelling, right? It's a visual narrative that you compile from valid data and research that you can then use to activate people. And I found jobs to be done as a research framework investigated things in a way that was interesting to me, in terms of the perspective that you bring to the table. But then it also came with a very kind of clear, almost rigorous way of compartmentalizing insights. Right? Oh, that's a job step. No, that's an outcome. It's very clear, and there's formats and everything. And I just found the precision and just the carefulness of the framework. I found it really helpful for me when I was doing field investigations to try to understand human behavior, right? Because ultimately, that's what jobs to be done is about. It's about trying to understand what people want and then putting that back into a commercial organization so that they can come up with solutions that solve for that need. And it was about 20 years ago that I came across jobs to be done. So for me, jobs to be done is a way of seeing the people that you serve independent of technology and solutions. It's not about you at all. It's not about your technology, your brand, your price point. And you need to leave all that aside. And what that does is it kind of shifts your perspective. Because most people in a commercial organization, they want to talk about themselves, our product,
Doesn't
our
everyone
features.
do?
They do. And, to be fair, though, there's value in doing that because as a business, you have to take care of your own solution and technology and price point and brand and marketing. That's all fine and good. But what Jobs to be Done does is it says, let's just look over here, right? And it's saying, okay, there are human beings over there. What are they trying to get done? And guess what? Use your solution is not their job to be done. Their job to be done is independent of that. In fact, I like to make a joke that using your solution, no, that's the pain that you inflict on them. Their job is something else, right? So that mindset shift for me, and then the methodology that comes with that, because if you do that mental switch away from my product and solution, what are people trying to get done independent of me? That brings up a really good question of, well, how do we understand fundamental human behavior for commercial purposes without talking about our solution? Right. Mm-hmm. And that's Jobs to be Done gives you that framework. Right. And I know academic researchers, they'll talk about needs and psychology and that's all fine and good too. But in a commercial setting, it's like, what is a need? How do I understand it? How do I listen for it? How do I distill that out? And then how do I operationalize that inside of my organization? And for me, that's what Jobs to be Done brought to the table. And it's a mindset. Ultimately, my definition of Jobs to be Done is a mindset shift away from you and towards them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What I find interesting in the context of facilitation and serving a group or a client is that they say that they need something or want something. What their actual need is very different.
That's right. Yeah. And in Jobs to be Done, you usually just don't go up to someone and say, do you need this? Or even, what do you need? Right? Because then they're going to respond to this, whatever that is. Or if you don't have that and you say, what do you need? They're going to respond in a way that they think you want to hear because of your commercial framing. Right. And so if I go out at the gate, I work at Mural and I ask people what they need, they're going to answer as if I have Mural tattooed across my forehead. Right. So instead, we ask them, hey, what are you trying to get done? Right. And then you ask, tell me about getting that done. What's the first thing that you do? What do you do after that? How do you feel along the way? What do you struggle with along the way? And you steer the conversation away from yourself very quickly and you just stay in that mode.
And it's beautiful because at the end of the day, and I think that's something that we often forget, is that everyone is trying to get something done.
Yeah.
Put other open to-do points on our list. And
that's right.
What makes them difficult? Why do we avoid some?
That's right.
What's the obstacle in the way?
That's right. In fact, those are great questions to get at the underlying Jobs to be Done. What do you avoid? What do you dread doing? What do you struggle with at this point, if you're talking about moving through a chronology of stages and steps to accomplish something? You can ask questions like, what's the biggest barrier that you have? What's holding you back? Right. And it's those questions. And by the way, the answer shouldn't be, your price or your product or your login screen or whatever. That's not what it is. It's about all the other stuff independent of you.
Yeah. And independent of, as you said, the tools, technologies, and brands we're using.
Correct. All technology, by the way. So we, in Jobs to be Done, we don't even use the word email, or I try to avoid the word document. And, things like that, because that's all a solution.
It's a tool.
Oh, that's a solution. Right. Exactly. So if you say take notes in a document, I would reframe that just as an example. If somebody says, yeah, I take notes in a document. Well, taking notes is a specific method and a document is a technology, right? I would say capture ideas or capture information, right?
And then it's interesting because is it capturing ideas and information or is it sharing ideas?
That's right. Then
very different things.
Exactly. But that opens up then, that's precisely what Jobs to be Done is it lets you question that. Well, they said they were taking notes in a document, therefore I have to help them take notes in a document. But if you say capture information and share information, now I can think about what's the best way to capture information. Oh, but they ultimately want to share it too. It's like, you don't get that from coming up with a solution for taking notes in a document, because you're going to solve around that problem. And that's precisely the mindset shift that I mentioned, is to open up your mind to see things that you might not have otherwise seen. Now, most of the time, I'll be honest, a lot of time, particularly if you have a group of people who have worked in a field or an organization for 5 years or 10 years, right? They might be implicitly aware of all these things, right? And all you do with Jobs to be done is hold up a mirror and say, go after this thing that you've already known intuitively, but you make it explicit, right? Other times, though, you actually show gaps and you're like, you're missing that over there because you're too consumed with your own solution space.
Yeah. And because we have been doing this for so long that we don't even realize why we're doing it. I was speaking to a colleague recently, and she shared that when she was still in a day job, she was asked to write these reports every month. And she asked, why do we actually have to write them? Question, didn't get a reply. So then she started to send the same report every month to see whether anyone is actually reacting or anyone is reading them. Nobody did.
That's interesting.
And then the question is, okay, so what job do we try to do by creating this report?
Yeah.
As one example.
That's literally the material of comedy. There was a movie, I just rewatched it, called Office Space with Julia Roberts. It's from the 90s. And it's a precursor to the TV show Office. The Office kind of makes fun of cubicles and all that whole scene and managers and things like that. But in this comedy movie from the 90s, there's this report. I forget what it's called, TPS report or something. Everybody in the office is talking about this TPS report, but nobody knows what it actually does. The important thing was they changed the cover letter. Like, you need a new cover on the report. Okay, we'll put a new cover on the TPS report. And nobody ever, what's the purpose of the report? Nobody cared. It was just, was it formatted right with the right cover sheet? It was literally the material for a joke.
Yeah. And it's actually so sad because I think it's still so true. How many times is everyone repeating an acronym? Nobody knows what it actually means, but nobody dares to ask what it means.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about this in the terms of product development. I used to have a product development background. Here at Miro, I took a sidestep over to customer success. So I understand go-to-market a little bit better, but I very often think back to product or solutions. And if you think about things like, where do product requirements come from? Right? A product manager wrote them down and there's teams of people executing against them. It's like, where did they come from? And do customers actually ever need those? You'll find a lot of it mirrors the story we just told about the report that people are just doing. It's like, well, I'm a product manager. I have to rate requirements. And they do, to be fair.
And nobody questions it because it's...
Not to the degree they need to. It's just kind of the first best idea kind of thing very often. Or that's what their managers or bosses want. Or there was one customer complaint that came in, so they rate a requirement against it. Or competitive, right? Because our competitors were doing it. Well, we got to beat our competitors. Why are they doing it? Because they're just sending in reports that nobody reads.
Maybe because
we got to copy that, right? Yeah. So if you look at the origin of a lot of requirements, this is normal too. Again, I'm not pointing fingers either. This is just how things happen. Is a lot of them are... And not all of them are ineffective. I'll say that too, right? Sometimes you do create value for customers, but a lot of them are just kind of in this, you're just kind of wrapped up in yourself. Like, we got to rate requirements. Where do they come from? They come from ourselves. Who's going to consume them? We're going to consume our own requirements. And you get in this circle, and what Jobs to be done does is says, stop the hamster wheel. Let's look over here for a moment and see if there's anything over there. If there's not, that's fine. You still got your hamster wheel going. Go back to your normal job. But we just might see things in a different way that we then say, oh, we should shift a little bit first.
Yeah. And one word that comes to my mind immediately is collaboration. Because following the ideas or brain farts of one product manager will not happen if there's sort of a collaborative project behind it. So more eyeballs to look at it, a conversation to happen around it. So how does collaboration then happen in this context?
I think that is one of the defining differences of how I view Jobs to be done and a lot of other folks in Jobs to be done, many of whom are consultants. right? Nothing against that. I know some really great jobs to be done consultants. Their job is rather to provide an answer to their client, right? Sometimes in a PowerPoint deck, sometimes in a workshop. And I'm not saying they don't care what happens after that, but because of the client consultant relationship, they're not necessarily the people that then implement it.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I see jobs to be done is it's a collaboration tool, right? Because you don't define the focus job or create a job map or prioritize a list of needs. You don't do that for the customer's benefit, or at least not directly, right? You can't sell a job map to a customer, right? It's also not something you take to the board or anything like, the board of directors or anything like that. It's so that your team internally can get aligned around a common vision, right? Because you need the outside in perspective. Okay, let's look at the customer and align to their perspective outside in. But you also need what I call inside across alignment too. And that's the hearts and minds of the people creating the solutions, right? So my approach to jobs to be done, just like we were talking about with journey maps, is that the outcomes of the jobs to be done analysis are now catalysts for conversations.
Yeah.
If this is true, and you can start the sentence with if, because it's a hypothesis, right? You don't know what's going to stick. If this is true, what should we work on? Where should we support the customer? And derive your requirements rather from that line of thinking and do it together. Why? Because you have better buy-in. People feel included. They have agency at that moment. And as you know, as a facilitator, you can include large teams very quickly with techniques and methods and get their input and have them have that buy-in and sense of participation using the jobs to be done artifacts. That's what I'm trying to teach.
And the use case that comes to my mind is for teams, actually, even where they're their own customers.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because I think what often goes wrong in team collaboration is that roles, responsibilities unclear. And now that we spoke about it, I think very often that outcomes, tools, and jobs are confused.
Correct.
And
very much
because of this inherent confusion, and there's overstepping, there's misalignment, there's all of that.
Correct. I write a lot about teams. It's not obvious, but if you read my writing, I talk about teams collaborating, trying to create a solution for the customer. And I think that the jobs to be done insights, again, is a catalyst for a conversation. So it necessarily means convening people and bringing them together and gathering people together. And you need a facilitator to do that. So part of jobs to be done work, in my opinion, is facilitating and leading conversations, which is very different than providing an answer. And, it's literally facilitating. And it's not just a conversation. It's about sense making. And for me, a customer-centered organization, we were talking earlier about, customer centricity is just kind of this surface level veneer. It's just the facade, right? But if you're customer-centered, you're using customer insight as the centrifugal force for conversations in your team that then gets internalized, right? So a customer-centered organization for me is everybody is able to regurgitate, the insights. Oh yeah, of course, this quarter we're working towards this goal, right? And they feel it. Everybody just feels it together. Obviously, that's more of an ideal state, but I think if folks are striving towards that and using artifacts like journey maps or using artifacts like the insights from jobs to be done as the beginning point for those conversations, that's when you become really customer-centered.
And I can see how this works on an organizational level because you're basically including everyone in the collective progress, and then everyone feels as if they're contributing to this progress, which is number one motivator in work, to have a sense of meaningful progress.
Accomplishment, absolutely, particularly as a team. Why do you get together as a team? Because we want to accomplish something. Yeah. You also want to belong somewhere, but I think it's this sense of accomplishment. The other effect that bringing this customer-centered insight in as the center point of your conversation is that it very often and quickly spans departmental or political lines or even team boundaries, right? Because now it's not marketing and sales and product trying to come together, and they each come in with their own incentives and their own hats on. As soon as you put the customer out there, that's the common ground. It's common ground that you can always find. And I find it very often defuses tensions between groups that have conflicting incentives or whatever the tension might be. It's like, okay, great. We're going to talk about the customer. Does everybody agree that we want to say, yes, everybody agrees you want to meet customer need. Like, you can't disagree with that almost, right? And I'm not talking about weaponizing that. It's more about putting that in the middle and making that your campfire that everybody gathers around. You harmonize a lot better. You harmonize perspectives when you do that.
I love that. Because it's, as you said, it's the one thing that is true for everyone. And then if we can agree on that, then we might have different approaches to serve this higher goal.
Yeah.
Then we can always come back to that and boil down and overcome the other agendas and the internal conflicts.
I like that. Other agendas. Absolutely. And very often in commercial organizations, well, let me rephrase that. Okay, why do we want to be customer centric? And that is ultimately, that's how you get more money, profit, right? Or staying afloat if you're a nonprofit, right? Whatever that is, a business has to have some business sense about itself, right? All too often, however, that's what's the center of attention. That's the focus, is be more profitable. Right. But that doesn't lead to common ground, right? Because everybody's going to understand that in their own way. And it's usually then brings up a cost cutting and let's move. We got to move faster because we got to be more profitable. Right. And then you're, working hard towards solving the wrong problem, right? Which doesn't help anybody either. So let's put customer at the center, but know that why are we doing that is because that's going to help our business eventually. Right. And then make the customer the centerpiece instead of just putting profit in the middle.
And it's interesting because it's again looking at the solution already before you have actually clarified what the problem is and what the process is. Because becoming more profitable, if you ask sales, finance, and marketing, product, they will all have very different and completely strategies to be more profitable.
That's correct.
Yeah. And what I also hear in this approach is change. And you spoke about mindset and a mindset shift, and maybe even a paradigm shift. What is the biggest obstacle for teams let's start with teams to move from the usual way of thinking to jobs to be done?
Yeah. I think it always begins with a sense of curiosity and humility, but also respect. That if you bring, curiosity and humility to the table, you still have to kind of respect some of these alternative or different perspectives that we're talking about. And that's often the biggest problem is that, us customer-centered or human-centered thinkers, systems thinkers, human-centered thinkers, will come into our teams and be really excited about it. But we have to realize that they're not ready. They're not open necessarily to that, right? So what I also talk about and very often getting through that mindset that is not necessarily curious with humility and respect for you, is you got to show them the benefit that this other way of thinking can bring, right? But do that in a way that meets them where they are, and do that in very lightweight ways. Right. So rather than say, no, we're going to take 2 days and go off site and we're going to have this big customer centered workshop that I'm going to lead, because by the end of it, they're going to check out. Right. Yeah. Rather think about what's something you can do a half an hour a week during your team meeting that is customer centered. And, rather than the big bang, think of small multiples. Right. I'm just going to bring this in and I'm going to bring that in. So it's actually not facilitating the big session. It's facilitating a series of small conversations.
Yeah. And the next steps. Two things come to my mind. One is, as you explained, the big offsite and imposing this this shift, it's actually almost neglecting the approach that you want to bring in, because as a manager or team leader or a leader in an organization, your customer are your people.
Totally.
These are your internal customer. So not making it about them. So praise customer centricity while not putting your customer, your employees, your team in the center.
Yeah.
It's basically quite schizophrenic.
Yeah. And, particularly if you have a design background or any, even just design thinking, it's like use your design skills to design that conversation. And what would you do? I would identify my stakeholders. I might do an empathy map or a persona, right? So one of the things that I teach is go out and do an empathy map for all those stubborn people around you.
Yes.
Right. Now design a half an hour exercise that gets them to have a little aha. You don't need the big aha. You just need a little aha.
Yeah. To get them on board.
To get them on board.
And this makes me think that we spoke about that in the beginning. Everyone loves to talk about themselves.
Yep.
And I think one thing that we underestimate that everyone loves to, especially in this work context, what I hear very often in team workshops is that people want to talk about the jobs they need to be done. When they are frustrated, it's because they cannot do the work that they are paid to do.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Because of office politics, because of broken technology, because of missing processes, whatsoever.
Yeah.
They just want to get the job done. So I think giving them the opportunity to actually verbalize, harmonize, and align what everyone needs to do and needs from the others in order to do that will make them feel heard.
Exactly.
Acknowledged.
Yep.
And sometimes it's as simple as that.
Yeah. So when we talk about facilitation, I think facilitation and facilitator, those words, you think of a big multi-hour, multi-day workshop. And there's somebody up front with flip charts and a timer going through this multi-hour or multi-day session, right? But I think facilitation is also, particularly team facilitation, right? Is I'm part of this team. How do I get them for 5 minutes a week, half an hour a week, whatever it is, to come into my world of customer centricity or jobs to be done or whatever that is? And that's kind of facilitating like over time, which is more of a, I don't know, what you call it, team facilitate? I don't know. Let's come up with a word, Miriam, on what do we call that type of facilitation?
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's what a team leader would do, right? So I think the old way of the old word would be managing.
Right. I agree.
It's managing 2.0, where it's not about managing down or micromanaging, but facilitating the team.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Right.
What are the skill sets or mindsets for you that are needed for that?
Well, curiosity, willingness, and respect to start off with, right? So you need to come in there with that. And I think there are a few practical skills as well too. And you basically you're the person that just raises your, I don't even say raise your hand, you raise your finger. It's like, I'm going to schedule that meeting or I'm going to put that async activity out in my world. Like you just got to take the first step, right? Again, I don't want to call it facilitation because it's just initiative. You have to raise your finger to take initiative, and you have to be of the mindset that you're going to take initiative. And as soon as you do that, then you're now responsible for questions that people might have.
Isn't that leadership?
It is leadership. Right? It's leadership. It's leading. Well, I've written about this too before, is that all leadership is collaboration leadership, or all leadership is facilitation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I speak about that a lot.
Yeah, because I bet you're writing a book on professionalism. I bet there's stuff in there about facilitating is being professional, right? It's about taking the initiative, raising your finger, getting the motion started, right? I think that's a big part of facilitation. But then you also have to keeping momentum. Mm-hmm. So taking initiative, keeping the momentum as well too. And I think a lot, my experience around customer centricity and human-centered design and things like that, particularly in large commercial organizations, I think there's it might be part hope and part luck, crossing your fingers, that there's going to be, the clouds are going to part, and this research project that Jim did is just going to deliver the answer down to you, and that everybody's going to know how to beat the competition from this one half day, thing. It's so there's just a lot of almost pressure to do all that. And it's almost never that way. It's almost always just nudging. It's we have a little bit more in customer data. Let's internalize that and nudge forward. So you're just constantly nudging forward is a better metaphor. And I think when you schedule these big workshops and which aren't bad, by the way, and I love running them, and I think they're important for having a shared moment in time, right? But you're not done. That's not going to give them the
starting point. It's not the end point.
It's just a moment in time, right? But what are all the other things that you have to do to keep the momentum together, right? So the initiating, but also keeping the momentum going, right? So that it's not just this one and done and Monday everybody forgets. I call that, by the way, workshop amnesia. Have you ever had workshop amnesia? We have this big workshop and you have a group hug at the end and we solved the problem. And then Monday is like, what? I don't know what just happened. It's like Men in Black. People forget.
It's the hangover after a party.
Totally. Exactly.
Nobody remembers what happened. What? Nobody wants to clean up the mess.
I volunteered for that. Really? I didn't remember. Yeah, it's like a party. Exactly. Right. All these half-empty bottles with cigarettes in them. And so, who's going to clean this up?
Not me. On the sticky notes that fall off the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And poof, it's gone. It evaporates. Right. That's natural. To some degree, that's going to happen.
Very human.
So your big impact workshops, just know that a lot of that's going to evaporate. But think about, okay, what are the small multiples I'm going to do after that?
Yeah. So what are your tips for that? So how do you keep the momentum?
Yeah, small exercises, thinking about your workflow and your rhythm of collaboration. How and when do your teams meet? And thinking about touch points there. Is this design problem, right? Think about your stakeholders. Think about the journey. So if your team is the stakeholder, what's the journey of the team? Oh, and there's a touch point. What if in my stand-up, I bring a fact about customers in? Or what about in this grooming set? I'm just talking about product stuff now and like agile rituals. But what if I inject this along the way? Now, the thing about that is it's the long game. Because you're not going to see the immediate effect, right? It's going to take a quarter or half a year or a year before you start getting teams, thinking about the customer first in a more internalized kind of way. But for me, that's the most durable and sustainable way to move towards customer centricity is small multiples over time.
Yeah. And what your description made me think of is the micro habits where you create new habits if you stick new habits to old habits.
Yes.
So we are brushing our teeth every morning.
Totally.
Do something right after or right before it.
That's right.
If you have the daily stand-up,
that's right.
In that, and
that's right.
Create a new habit.
The daily stand-up begins with a customer story.
Yeah.
Boom. Do that every time. Or the ends or whatever it is. Or, before you go do I'm talking from the product standpoint, but before you do a product demo, describe the persona and the customer need that this addresses. You don't get to do your product demo until you talk about the customer need.
Yeah.
Take 2 minutes to do that, right?
Yeah.
So those types of things, I think, over time are where you build up a culture of collaboration and you build up a culture of customer centricity. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that with some, one of the advantages of being at Mural is I kind of have this helicopter view of things because I get to work with lots of different companies, lots of different people around the world in different industries and help them, co-create with them and try to solve their problems. But, IBM in particular, I've worked a lot with IBM and they rolled out about 15 years ago, they rolled out their enterprise design thinking program, which leverages design thinking as a social technology to affect larger cultural changes inside of the organization. And I've been on calls with like straight up hardcore IBM engineers. And they'll say things like, what is the as is journey? Or what is the to be journey? Or what's the persona on this? Because they have these. So what they've done, to your point about habits, is they've introduced a language and a way of working that is consistent. And then over time, those become habits so that everybody's just, they want to see it before they get started with whatever the technology is they want to know those things. And with the common language, they can all talk to each other that way.
Beautiful example. And this creates such a bonding.
It does. Absolutely. Absolutely. Does that help the bottom line? It's like, well, that, I think we still need to see. But there are other organizations like Intuit, the large tax company here that embarked on a customer-centered journey over 2 decades ago, right? And again, you go there on campus and people are talking about the customers and bringing that, even if it's just a small touch point, they're bringing that into their interactions.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was thinking of another question that I want to ask. about the human-centered and what if now the machines come into play. What I kind of primed myself into was the thought that if we are not customer-centric, because what I remember from design thinking is that you're not looking at the average customer. No, you're looking at one example persona. And by doing that, you empathize with the real person and their needs and their desires. What AI does, it focuses at averages because that's what AI is very good at. So if we are not customer centric, this means that we go with the average and try to solve a problem as opposed to focus on one particular person. And then I think customers will be so overwhelmed with just any information that we have to, I think, to survive and to really speak to the customer. We have to be customer centric and to look at the individual.
Agree. And I think for me, the key word there is empathy. Looking at average behavior is not necessarily a bad thing.
At all.
Yeah,
AI
not at all.
Better than we do.
They do it better. The AI can do it better than we can do. And if you're a software company and you want to scale software, which is the advantage of software, right? The cost of production is just hitting a copy key and then it's out in the world, or however it works. SaaS or cloud based, it doesn't matter. It's about scale, and the way to scale is to find patterns that scale, patterns in human behavior that scale. And if AI can do that, that's not a bad thing at all. But what's missing for me is empathy. Because AI is not going to come up with your perfect solution or the solution that really, wows customers and things like that. That's where humans need to come in and bring the empathy on top of it. So for me, that's the critical difference. And that speaks to what I mentioned before about internalization of human-centered insights, right? That people need to internalize it and empathize with it. That's the internalization that I'm talking about. Imagine teams of teams, right? Not just your team, but the teams around you have a common language in which they can interact around the customer, and B, everybody's just has internalized or empathized with the customer, that it just oozes out of their mouths, right? That's a customer-centered organization to me.
Yeah.
And facilitators are the one that set that in motion. Because guess what? IBM couldn't have done enterprise design thinking without facilitators.
Hopefully now they keep it rolling, because that's my assumption. Team leaders have a facilitator's mindset to really integrate that in the daily work.
Correct. And they have badges and certifications and stuff, and you can be like a practitioner, but also a facilitator. And, on our side too, Mural acquired a company called Luma, which very similarly has its own set of design thinking techniques. And we have 3 different levels of certification. You're either a certified practitioner or a certified facilitator or a certified trainer, where you can actually train other people to facilitate.
Yeah. When I heard empathy and the way you described it, what came to my mind, and I heard it from another podcast guest, and I don't remember who it was, that we have to fall in love with our participants and we have to fall in love with our customers.
Yeah.
To really empathize. If we don't like our customers, if we don't like our clients, we'll fail serving them. If we don't fall in love with our participants, we just become annoying.
Agree. Yeah. And it's falling in love, and what's the definition of love? But if you unpack that, I think a lot of those words that we've been talking about apply as well too. Curiosity. Yeah. Right. You need to be so in love and passionate about your customers that you just want to learn everything about them. Right. The curiosity, openness. Right. Also humility, though, because I might know the best way to use a product. Again, I work here at Mural. I'm an expert Mural user. Right. But I don't go in when I talk to a customer or I'm trying to help them solve their problem, which, by the way, may not include Mural. I'm trying to help them solve their problem. And I see them using Mural in a way that I know a much better way. There's a much better way to do that. Show me how you would do that. I want to learn from them, because they're the master of how they get things done right now. Right. And if you go in with a curious mindset, you're going to learn more than you do that if you go in and say, let me show you the best way to do this. You know what I mean?
And once they had the opportunity to speak and show you, they would be more open to actually to a better way to do it.
Totally. And it's like,
the trust level already.
Thanks for showing me that. Let me show you a different way to do it. And then they usually go, you just saved me hours of work. Thank you for, or something like that. Right. But I think the point is, for me personally, in that moment, let's just say it's a one-on-one type of situation, I empathize more with them, right? So for me, it's this willingness and curiosity to go out and want to empathize with them where they are now, not, well, what they're doing. We have a better way than what they're doing now. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe, but yeah, okay, that's what the marketing message has to say, is like, well, first understand what they actually are doing now, right?
Yeah. Although it might open an entire Pandora's box, I still ask the question. When you speak about human-centered design, what role do machines and AI play? Do you see an human and AI-centered design at some point?
I think we're already going down that pipe already, I think, to some degree. And I think part of the problem, I don't know if it's a mistake or a problem, or part of the phenomenon that I think I'm seeing a little bit out there, is we want AI to help us do some things that we do. And if I'm using human-centered design, then I have AI do that. But I think that's the wrong way to look at it. It's more about, I have to still practice human-centered design. AI can help me, but it's not about just taking it all away. It's about helping me at a micro level. It's about helping me think. So the line between me doing it and AI doing it is not, it's not a clear cut. Oh, there's that use case over there. Go do that, AI. It's this jagged, waggly line where I go to AI and then I become human again and I do it. And then I go back to AI. And it's this very fine, microscopic zigzag line where I think AI will help with human-centered design.
And I was actually thinking of a step further, where you're designing not necessarily anymore for humans only, but for AI. So if humans outsource their jobs to AI,
right,
and AI is taking decisions, that's what that's what AI will eventually do: take decisions and do the jobs that we can outsource. Then basically, as a result, what we have to do is to design for AI. AI-centered design.
Yeah, and AI is different models and things. They have different personalities, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I just heard twice. That was interesting. In the same week, I heard two different people use the same analogy, which is that AI is sometimes like a toddler, that they don't do what you want them to do, and you have to ask them 3 times to do it. You're like, and you type in your prompt something like export or put everything into this format. And then it doesn't do it. And you say, I asked you to put it in this format. And you go, and it goes, oh, I'm sorry. I'll redo it and do it in that format. And then it doesn't do it again. And you add it just has this toddler-like mind. So right there, that could be a component of a persona, that AI is like a toddler, right?
Yes. And what I find interesting, so that was my experience. I learned from AI so much about my own communication. Because if it was a human, I would get angry at them. You don't understand what I mean.
Exactly.
Why don't you put it in the column? And with AI, I realized, apparently I wasn't precise enough.
You weren't clear enough, right? Yeah.
In explaining what I really need.
That's right.
And I really learned to be much more precise in my communication.
Precise in your own language.
To AI not getting it.
But to be fair, sometimes AI it just ignores it or skips. So it just has its own little toddler-like personality there as well too. So I think I use that example because there are aspects of AI that we could personify in a persona, right?
Yeah,
right. And then design for that, right? So if the outputs in your prompt, you got to be specific with those outputs, right? That would help you design a solution for working with AI, knowing that personality of AI.
Yeah. And what their goal is.
Right.
Which to some extent then at least makes it a little bit more predictable.
Does AI have a job to be done? That's a good question. Do they have a goal? I don't know. What's the goal of AI in and of itself?
I think at the moment to make our lives easier.
Right. There you go. Right. Yeah.
And then I read something very intriguing, that AI at the moment, we are all training AI because it looks at how do we communicate with it. And from our way of communication, our way of behavior, it then derives how it should communicate and behave.
Right. Interesting.
So if we are kind and nice and collaborative,
Gotcha.
then this is what it will pick up and replicate. And apparently there were so many AI models before ChatGPT that were closed after 20 hours because they were trained on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then became fascist.
Yes. Right. They became, I've read about that as they're like racist answers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because that's what humans do, after all, right? Yeah,
exactly.
So in that sense, AI is like a mirror, right? It is averages. It's this. This is how that model thinks that humans interact with each other, right?
Yeah, and if we're outsourcing jobs, then at some point we have to take into consideration that. And I find it funny because some of my email conversations, I can clearly see that we are two ChatGPT or two AI assistants communicating with each other.
Right. Yeah.
Please send a reply.
That's funny. Yeah.
The moment we know that actually the person on the other side is not a human anymore doing the job.
That's right.
We have to adjust our methods.
I agree. And then the big question is what's left over? What if AI is not just doing the heavy lifting? That's a phrase we used to say in English, right? Heavy lifting. I think it came from like lifting things, right? But now the heavy lifting is cognitive, right? So AI does the heavy lifting. It's going to do the thinking for us and the writing and the composing. What's left over? I think empathy.
Mm-hmm.
I think imagination.
Mm-hmm.
I think of things like decision making. AI is not really good at decision making. You ever ask AI for a decision? It's like, you got to go ask human beings. I can't help you.
Because they don't know, they cannot distinguish what's relevant from what's irrelevant.
Right. Yeah.
So you give me your goal and then I solve the problem for you. You have to decide what the goal is. Yeah.
Which theoretically you could prompt all that in. You could say, I'm this organization and we have a team to, like, you could prompt all that in, but there's still a broader context that human beings are in all the time, that to make a decision that your AI may not know all that as well too. So,
and you don't want it because maybe two organizations can have exactly the same goal, can have same products. Take Miro and Miro.
That's right.
But then what makes the difference? Maybe your company values.
I think it's the people and the humanity of the people making the decisions. That's what's going to be the difference.
Yeah.
And that means bringing empathy to the I don't think AI is going to solve for that.
No.
But that means bringing empathy and imagination to the table, and those real human qualities that AI has not yet picked up on. Maybe if we talk in 5 years, Miriam, we'll be talking about empathetic AI that can imagine things. So, which might be a little scary. But at this point in time, when we talk about human-centered and human-centered design, AI can do a lot of the quote unquote heavy lifting in terms of, generating content and ideas and even insights, right? And that makes us as human-centered design practitioners perhaps better researchers or better practitioners, because now we can spend our time exploring other areas that aren't on the average AI radar. That means we can spend more of our time empathizing or going even deeper, or we can spend our time doing more projects quicker, right? Because if you think about, human-centered design as a practice inside of a large organization, like what percentage of projects are actually informed or influenced by a human-centered design team or a team of researchers or UX team? It's only a It's like we need more coverage of human-centered design thinking and nests in our organizations. Okay, let's take that same team. Let's not reduce the team. Let's let them do a touch, twice as many places in our business motions now with human-centered thinking.
Because then, and that's then full circle to where we started, we'll bring in the collaboration part. Then there's more time and space for the collaboration and having
and the facilitated conversations that come with that, right? So it's ultimately it is about collaboration and facilitating those moments of collaboration. It always comes back to that. It's interesting that we did that too, because I don't know, maybe I'm biased because I work for a company that produces collaboration solutions, both Mural and Luma. But I'm like, all of my thinking is like, wow, it comes back to people getting together and solving problems together, right?
Yeah.
Because as soon as you have a company that's more than one person, right? Unless you're sitting in your garage with napkin, doing your solution on the back of a napkin, as soon as you have two people, you got to come together, right? And then you get 400,000 person organizations, and you wonder why they're dysfunctional is because they're not collaborating right, and the conversations aren't facilitated, right? So they're literally not reaching their business goals because of how human beings come together.
Yes. Yes. And as soon as there are two human beings coming together, it's going to be messy.
It's going to be messy, right? You get two human beings, you get 5 opinions.
Yes.
Wait, we're only 2 opinions. How can we have 5 opinions with 2 people? But you do. And again, I don't think there's no silver bullet here, or magic solution. It's just about nudging.
Yeah.
But I think so if we improve collaboration and we improve facilitation skills, imagine all of your managers had some base level knowledge of how to facilitate conversations, right? It might not move the bottom line or the stock price right away, but a small gain there will have outsized effects downstream and later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Outsized effects.
Yeah.
You put $1 in there, you're going to get $100 out eventually the other side.
100%. I think that facilitation is definitely the next most important leadership management skill.
It's the future skill. I agree. It's the future skill.
It's impossible to keep, especially a team of Gen Xers.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Gen Zers together.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
In Alpha.
Yeah, I agree.
What remains your number one facilitation challenge?
My number one facilitation challenge? Like me as a facilitator? Or me trying to help other people facilitate, which is what I do a lot of, actually.
Maybe both.
Maybe both.
What is
my number one facilitation? Yeah, that's a good question. My number one facilitation challenge. I mean, I just need a little bit of stability and I think this is a facilitation challenge a lot of teams or people are having right now. We just had that economic downturn a few years ago. Now there's political challenges around the world. And as a result of that, a lot of the organizations that we work for are doing layoffs. They're doing reorgs. Or even recalibrating their entire businesses, right? So it's really, when we talk about collaboration and facilitation, it's really hard for folks these days, I believe, to just get a foothold and get their head screwed on straight enough to even know who they need to collaborate with and what challenge they're facilitating around, just because it feels like a fun house where the floor is moving the whole time and you're trying to walk in a straight line, but the floor panels are moving the whole time. That's really challenging, is how do you facilitate a clear and focused conversation in a time of complete chaos around you?
Yeah, that is a very good point. And I wonder whether it's actually ever going to change back to what it used to be, just because of the speed everything is developing. Yeah. So how do you know whether the people are still working in the company, whether
right, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. And contractors coming in and okay, now I facilitate the conversation and they've internalized it and they empathize and they have great imaginations, but 3 months from now that team isn't there anymore, literally, right?
And that's a very interesting design challenge, actually.
Yes.
Because how do you document all the outcomes? Yep. How do you create ownership, even if it's for a short time? And how do you keep the momentum if the team is changing?
Yep. I do not have a solution for that
yet
at all. Momentum, ownership, knowledge management, or whatever that term is, but I guess another kind of conclusion that I've come to is that in a knowledge worker organization, people, using their heads, sitting in front of computers most of the time, that is not in the factory. In that type of organization, something like a layoff or a reorg is just devastating to the progress of internalized empathy and the progress of imagining, futures that don't yet exist. And I think it doesn't show up on org charts. It doesn't show up on bottom lines. It doesn't show up in layoff rosters and things like that. It's like you're getting rid of all of that equity that you've built up. It's like this empathy equity inside of an organization. And how do you keep that momentum going as a leader and as a facilitator? I do not know. My only solution is don't stop firing people.
It's because it's also you're creating trauma. I mean, for some it's just small T. For others, it's
Yeah.
And with the recent podcast guest, we spoke about organizational trauma.
Yeah.
So how does an organization actually cope
Totally
with that? Because very often the way the layoffs are communicated and people are actually supported and held is not very human-centered.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Human-centered work. Yeah. Human-centered collaboration design, right? Yeah, you can think about that. I believe it was Culture Amp, a company called Culture Amp, released this study not too long ago, maybe 6 months ago, where they showed that, a big round of layoffs that has, I think it was 2-year effect on morale of the organization, that it takes 2 years to recover the trauma side of it. It takes 2 years to recover, but a lot of organizations have more layoffs and reorgs in that time. Yeah. So you have this perpetual downward spiral of trauma and morale deficiencies, and then people get burned out and performance goes down, and productivity or whatever the heck that is supposed to mean goes down as well too.
Yeah. And then those who leave with having lived through the shock of being laid off from one day to another, go to another organization, how to rebuild the trust.
That's right. Now you're all over again. So so it's not even keeping your momentum from team to team or even within your organization. Is how do you personally keep momentum going through your career towards building up your own equity of empathy and understanding and things like that. And of course, if you switch industries, a lot of that understanding you had around customers, that love and curiosity of customers, that might go away for yourself as well.
Yeah. And then it's important, how do we hold space as facilitators? How do we hold space for ourselves so that we can hold space for these groups?
Correct.
Given all the emotional charge they will bring by definition into the space.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. Going back to your question, I don't know if I'm working on it. I think it's just, that's what's thrown at us these days. I'm sure you're seeing some of that too, right? Yeah.
And final question. What is it that you wished you had known before when you initially started?
That's a good question. This might sound, considering, coming down from our lofty heights of, exploring organizational dynamics, something a little bit closer to home around facilitating sessions, let's say, whatever that might be, is I wish I knew more about setting expectations and preparing people in advance so that you get the most out of your together time, that's a phrase we've used here at Mural, right? Because synchronous time together is so valuable. So how do you get the most out of that? And I think one of the big unlocks is you need to do things in advance. Right. And I know, even just thinking about the example that I mentioned when I got started as a facilitator, at least in my mind, I said, oh, hey, I created this map. I'm going to throw a big workshop. I invited everybody and they showed up and they're like, what are we doing? Why are we here? Right. And wait a minute, I have to set expectations. But it's more than that. It's also about trying to get some of the work done before you even get started as well, too. And I wish I knew more about that and how to do it when I was getting started.
How do you do it now?
Well, a lot of communication, right? And the big buzzword right now is async, right? So I think a lot more about async motions that you can do, which is sometimes challenging if you're a consultant and you're working with clients, particularly high level, you're working with CEOs or VPs or whatever. It's like, well, I can't send them homework before our session, right? So that's challenging. So, you can take what you can get. But I was designing a workshop that we were using here internally around team autonomy. Yeah. How do you know if your team is autonomous? And then what are specific things you can do to act more autonomously and to feel more autonomous? And together with my stakeholder in the engineering department, we created a workshop, and it ended up being over 3 hours. And she's like, you got 90 minutes, Jim. That's all I can get out of people's calendars. So I front loaded it. I made video, me talking. We did a survey up front. We had some pre-reading. We had a couple of check box. They had to check off a to-do list, and we got it down to 90 minutes. So we cut it in half. But what that meant was just a lot of stuff that they had to do up front, which was okay because they could do it on their own pace and at their own and when it made sense for them, right?
And you got me stuck at when you said I cannot send the CEO homework. And what came to my mind is why not?
Why not? Yeah.
And obviously, I know what you mean by that is their calendars they're so busy, and the CEO won't accept homework from me, and they're the client and the service provider.
That's right.
And somehow, the longer I think about it, the more I actually come to the conclusion that because it is the CEO,
that's right,
to send them homework. Because
to protect their time. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. Because if they show up at the workshop and they have no clue what it's about, they haven't prepared anything, they have not thought about it, then they will lose their time and waste other people's time because they will say, why are we talking about that now?
Right.
I don't understand why we're here. We should have done instead of Y.
Or I got to think about that. Let me go get the statistics or the report or whatever. And you're like, don't do that together. That's not together time. That's async. Yeah.
And I think that's actually, if a workshop is so important that the CEO gets involved.
That's right.
They have to get involved.
They have to do their homework. Yeah.
And I think there's something, I mean, who am I to judge? But looking from the external, just with a critical mindset, it's like, something is deeply wrong here. If a CEO is only running from meeting to meeting and doesn't have time to prepare it, to do work.
Yeah. Crazy. That's not good behavior either, right? Yeah, I agree. I guess the more accurate question is, how do you assign homework to the CEO or leaders or clients if you're a consultant and actually have a critical mass of those people do it before they get to the session? Because that's the big problem with async work. So I've kind of learned about setting expectations is good and send out things in advance. But now the problem I have is, well, we get into the session and only half of the people actually took the survey or watched the video. So now you got to do it anyway, right? Together.
And that's, again, I think a beautiful design challenge, because if you do it again, the message you will send is next time nobody will do it.
That's right.
Because you'll do it anyway. So how can you still have an incentive for those who did it?
That's right.
They have an advantage.
Correct. In fact, in one with my colleague, Mark Tippin, in one session that we were designing, it was a larger workshop. We actually split people into two groups. We didn't do it this way, though, because it never worked. Something else changed in the workshop. But our plan was to split people in two groups. If you did the survey before you got to the session, you got to go see a talk with the co-founder of Luma. If you didn't do it, we're going to do it together. So they literally got more value if you did it in advance, right? We didn't have to do it for other reasons, but we were thinking about exactly that question is, how do we design it so that those people get a bonus and the other people don't? Usually don't have that luxury, though, because you're kind of moving quick. So, I mean, just to get practical about it, one of the things that I'll do is, okay, we sent out this video or the survey, and we're just going to review it very quickly because this should be familiar to you.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a passive aggressive shame that you put on the people who didn't do it. Only passive aggressive, though. It's like, oh, if you didn't do it, this isn't a review, but I just called it a review. So you better listen right now. Right. And then you do just go over it really quickly and hope that they pick it up, but give that moment. So you can take 5 minutes or whatever to go over an hour of work to acknowledge it and stuff like that. And then if you didn't do it, well, yeah, shame on you, I guess. But to your point, though, is that maybe next time they'll do it when they're in my session, that's facilitating over time, right? Because you're not just thinking about this one big session at the offsite, retreat or whatever it is that I'm going to facilitate and it's going to be great. Is how do I facilitate behavior change and habits, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like habit facilitation is part of facilitation, I think, too.
Yeah. Raising the participants we want to have.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. We spoke for almost 1.5 hours.
1.5.
So much ground.
Feels like we just got started. I want to unpack facilitating habits now. What is facilitating habits? I have no idea. Those two words I just put them together and threw them out, but I don't really know what that means. But I think you get a sense of what I'm talking about, right? Like,
yeah. And I think it's, we touched a little bit on that when we spoke about the momentum.
Right, exactly.
Create the momentum.
That's right, yeah.
And then you mentioned already the habits.
Habits.
That's what I was thinking of when you said now.
So if you're thinking about facilitating in session design, can you do it in a way that one of the direct effects at the end is you're starting to create habits of the people that participated, right? That's an interesting way to think of facilitation.
Yeah, the micro change. Yeah.
Yep. That's it. Exactly.
Great food for thought. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, no, thanks. This was fun. I think we could have continued talking for another hour and a half, and I hope people are still listening at this point in the show.
Yeah. Otherwise, they will miss out.
They do miss out because I think not only did we have this conversation off camera that was really great, but I think at the end we really got to some really interesting points at the end.
Absolutely, definitely some golden nuggets to think about.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to get there together. I really feel like we co-created this. I know you were asking questions, but I appreciate where you were steering things and the thoughts that you contributed as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah. Wonderful conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime.
Yes. And next time about unprofessionalism.
Okay. Happy to talk to you about that too.
Wonderful. Thank you for staying tuned and for listening until the very end. I hope that you found the inspiration and the wisdom that you are looking for. And I hope that you will subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of the interviews with another inspiring facilitator from across the world. I'm devoted to continue this podcast and to deliver weekly an episode that maintains the quality that you expect and you deserve. And if you would like to help me to maintain this quality and to keep the podcast free, please help us. Visit workshops.work/support to make a small donation to keep the podcast free. Thank you so much. I hope to be in your ears next week.